My dad showed up at my door and said, "Your brother starts college next year. Give him this apartment so he can get used to it." So I responded, "Or you could kick him out like you did to me and let him figure it out himself." I remember asking if this was a joke, my voice cracking like I was still 14. Not technically a legal adult, but he didn't blink, just pointed to the bag already packed and said I had 10 minutes before he changed the locks. That was how I left home, not with a celebration, but with a cheap gym bag, $60 in my pocket, and no clue where I'd sleep that night. At the time, I had just graduated high school 3 days prior. I wasn't some rebellious teen. I wasn't getting into trouble. No drugs, no skipping class, no fighting. I had a part-time job at the local gas station, a 3.7 GPA, and a dream of maybe getting into community college if I could afford it. But none of that seemed to matter. The truth is, I'd always known I was the spare. My younger brother Travis was the golden child. Even as a kid, I used to joke that he must have had a halo tucked somewhere in his closet. Straight A's, sure, but so did I. But when he did it, it was brilliant. When I did, it was expected. He'd crash my bike and get a replacement the next day. I'd break a shoelace and get blamed for not taking care of my things. Travis was 2 years younger, but they treated him like the heir to a throne I didn't know existed. He got braces and tennis lessons. I got used sneakers and silence. Every time I asked why things were so different between us, my dad would say, "Don't be dramatic, Mason. Life's not fair." And that was the end of the conversation. Always. I learned early not to push too hard, so I kept my head down, worked my shifts, did my homework, and told myself that once I turned 18, I'd leave on my own terms. But I guess they beat me to it. The first week out of that house was brutal. I couch hopped with friends until one of their parents got uncomfortable. I slept in the break room at work one night when it was raining too hard to walk the streets. Eventually, I found a dingy room in a shared house with 3 strangers, one of whom sold weed out of the living room, another who blasted music at 3 a.m., and the third who barely spoke English, but always smiled and offered me instant noodles. That man, Shun, was more family than my parents had ever been. It took me 4 years to get on my feet. I worked every job I could: cashier, delivery driver, late-night janitor at a mall where the air always smelled like expired popcorn. I studied on breaks, took online classes, and eventually earned a degree in IT. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. No help from my parents, no trust fund, no secret savings account, just me, a busted laptop, and sheer stubbornness. By the time I hit 26, I was living in a clean 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. I had a car that ran, a job that paid well, and for the first time in my life, a sense of peace. Not happiness exactly, that came later, but peace. I didn't think about my family much. I didn't visit, didn't call. I wasn't bitter, at least not consciously. I just figured if I wasn't good enough for them, then I sure as hell wasn't going to beg now. And then one Sunday morning, everything shifted again. It started with a knock. I was in sweats, just about to start some laundry, when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks, too firm to be friendly. I peeked through the peephole and froze. My mum. Behind her, slightly out of view, was my dad, arms crossed in that same posture I remembered from the day they kicked me out. My first thought wasn't, "Why are they here?" It was, "How do they even know where I live?" I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Mason." My mom started all breathy and wide-eyed, like this was some long-lost reunion. "You look grown." "I am grown," I replied flatly. "I am." "What do you want?" My dad cut in. "No small talk. We need to talk. Can we come in?" I stared at them for a long second. I didn't say yes, I just stepped aside. They sat on my couch like it was theirs. My mum looked around like she was inspecting the place for dust. My dad remained standing, hands on his hips. The silence was thick. "We've had a rough few years," my mum finally said, clasping her hands in her lap. "And your brother?" "Well, he's in a bit of a bind." I felt something cold twist in my stomach. Of course, this was about Travis. "What kind of bind?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "He got laid off," she said gently, like I was supposed to feel sorry. "And his fiancée left him, took the car. He's struggling." I waited. "We thought," my dad said, "that since you're doing well now and since you have this place, maybe it's time to come together as a family." I raised an eyebrow. "Come together how?" My mum glanced at my dad before answering. "We think it would make sense for Travis to move in here just temporarily until he gets back on his feet." There was a moment of stunned silence. I almost laughed. Almost. "You're joking," I said. "No," my dad replied without hesitation. "You've got the space. It's the least you can do. Family comes first." Those 3 words hit me hard. Family comes first. The same family that threw me out like I didn't matter. The same family that let me go hungry while they turned Travis's room into a study after I was gone. "So let me get this straight," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You kicked me out on my 18th birthday with no warning and no support. And now you're asking me to let Travis stay with me because family comes first. My mum looked uncomfortable. We made mistakes. Mistakes? I cut in. That wasn't a mistake. It was a decision. Mason, my dad said as he stepped closer, acting like he still had control. He's your brother. He needs your help. You don't abandon family. I got to my feet and looked straight at him. You already did. The room fell silent again. Listen, my mum said in a softer voice. He's been through a lot. He's not like you. He doesn't deal with hardship very well. He's always been sensitive. And you think I wasn't? I asked in disbelief. I just didn't have the luxury of breaking down. It was obvious they either didn't understand or didn't want to. My dad kept pushing, giving excuses, laying on the guilt, and comparing me to Travis. He even claimed I had built my life because of their tough love. I almost choked when I heard that. It wasn't tough love. It was abandonment, plain and simple. They left that day without getting the answer they wanted, but I knew it wasn't over. I could feel they weren't going to let this go, especially with Travis involved. I had no idea how far they were willing to take it to get what they wanted. The difference was I wasn't the scared 18-year-old they had thrown out anymore. This time I had something to lose and something worth protecting. I just didn't know the real storm was only beginning. They didn't call for a few days after that. I started thinking maybe they had finally accepted my answer and backed off. I even convinced myself their request had been nothing more than one desperate attempt to manipulate me. But by the following weekend, I realized I had underestimated them. It started with a voicemail from Travis. I hadn't heard his voice in years and I barely recognized it. He sounded tired, his voice was rough, and everything he said felt strangely rehearsed, like he was trying too hard to sound helpless. Hey, Mason, Mum and Dad told me they came to see you. I know I'm asking a lot, but I'm out of options. I lost my job and my apartment, and I've been staying with a friend, but that isn't working anymore. I could really use your help until I get back on my feet. Please call me. I never called him back. It wasn't because I didn't care, it was because I knew exactly how it would end. Travis had always been able to get by on his charm. He had a way of making himself seem helpless, and people, especially our parents, always rushed to save him. I wasn't going to do that. Not this time. I had scars they never even noticed, and I wasn't about to pretend they didn't exist just because Travis was finally dealing with the consequences of his own choices. Even so, that voicemail stayed with me. It wasn't guilt I felt, it was dread, because if Travis had reached out himself, it meant my parents had already moved on to the next step of their plan. I was right. 3 days later, I came home from work and saw my dad's car parked outside my apartment building. My stomach immediately sank. He was standing by the entrance with his arms crossed, wearing the same expression I remembered so well. When I walked up, he didn't move. He simply said, "We need to talk." I didn't invite him inside. "We've been patient," he said, talking to me like I was still a child. "But you're being selfish." I actually laughed. "Selfish? You really think I'm the selfish one? I've built a stable life, but Travis hasn't. Is that what you're saying?" He looked at me and said, "Don't you think your brother deserves a chance?" "Whatever Travis deserves has nothing to do with me," I answered. He stepped closer. "You're part of this family whether you like it or not." "No," I replied without looking away. "You made sure I wasn't." He didn't like hearing that. His jaw tightened and I saw anger flash across his face. More than anger, I saw entitlement. He honestly believed everything I had built was something he could demand. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at me and said, "You'll regret this," before turning around and walking away. 2 days later, I started getting messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. Cousins, aunts, and even someone claiming to be a family friend all contacted me. Every message said basically the same thing. They told me it was wrong to turn my back on family, that Travis was struggling, that he needed help, and that since I was doing well, I should support him. One cousin even wrote, "I never thought success would make you so heartless." It was obvious they had all heard the same story. My parents had clearly painted me as the villain, probably making it sound like I was living in luxury while Travis was out sleeping on the streets. My apartment wasn't anything fancy, but that didn't matter anymore. The story had already been told and I had been cast as the villain. I could have defended myself. I could have explained what really happened when I turned 18 and how my parents threw me out with nowhere to go. But I was done living under their version of the truth. I wasn't going to beg people to believe me. That was when everything slowly started to unravel. Travis began showing up in person. First he waited in the parking lot, then in the lobby. And before long he was standing outside my apartment door with the same defeated expression every time, looking like he barely had the strength to speak. One evening he quietly said, "I'm not here to fight, I just need your help." I looked at him and answered, "I'm not the person you should be asking." He shook his head. "You're the only one who can help me." That sentence stayed with me, not because it was true, but because he genuinely believed it. My parents had taught him to see me as a safety net instead of a brother, and now that they had run out of options, they were pushing him onto me. Then everything reached a breaking point. I was buried in a network issue at work when my landlord called, which almost never happened. I answered, thinking something had gone wrong with the building. Instead, he cheerfully asked if I was still planning to move out by the 1st of the month. I was completely confused. Then he explained that Travis had stopped by that morning and told him I was moving out and transferring the lease to him. He even had paperwork with him. My stomach dropped. I immediately told him none of it was true and that I wasn't moving anywhere. The landlord paused and said Travis had claimed I asked him to handle everything while I was at work. I was so stunned I could barely respond. Luckily, my landlord said he hadn't changed anything and only called to make sure the story was true. As soon as I hung up, I rushed home. Travis was waiting outside my apartment again, this time with a backpack beside him and a smug look on his face. "What the hell did you do?" I demanded. He looked at me like he had no idea what I meant. I reminded him that he had told my landlord I was moving out. He simply shrugged and said he figured I would come around sooner or later, so he was just speeding things up. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you thought lying and pretending to be me was a good idea?" I asked. He actually tried to defend himself, saying it wasn't really forgery because we were family and insisting he was only trying to help. I stared at him in disbelief. "Help who?" I asked. He calmly replied, "Everyone. This whole situation is tearing the family apart. Once I move in, everything will work itself out." That was when it finally hit me. Travis truly believed he was the victim. He honestly thought he was entitled to my apartment, my stability, and everything I had worked for. The worst part was that he didn't even see me as a person anymore. I was just the answer to his problems. That night, I locked every door and window. I texted my landlord and made it clear that nobody except me was allowed to make any changes to my lease. The next morning, I changed the locks and bought a small security camera for my front door. Maybe it seemed paranoid, but I wanted proof if anything else happened. It didn't take long. About a week later, I came home and noticed fresh scratches on my lock. Someone had clearly tried to force it open. I checked the camera footage, and my heart sank. It was my father. He had tried to break into my apartment. That was the moment everything changed. I stopped hoping they would suddenly come to their senses because I finally accepted the truth. They weren't just entitled, they were dangerous. From that point on, I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was getting ready for whatever they tried next. If they thought I would sit back and let them tear my life apart piece by piece, they had no idea who they were dealing with. This time, I wasn't alone, and I wasn't going to keep playing defense. I was already planning my next move, and they would never see it coming. When I watched the video of my father trying to pick my lock like some cheap criminal, I didn't feel scared right away. At first, I just felt numb. My mind almost refused to process what I was seeing. He wasn't wearing gloves or even trying to hide his face. He had on an old baseball cap and the same jacket I remembered from years ago, as if he had stopped by after running errands and decided to commit a crime before heading home. The only reason he didn't get inside was because I had changed the lock that very morning. In that moment, I admitted something I had been denying ever since I turned 18. I was scared, not only because I thought they might eventually hurt me, although I couldn't rule that out anymore, but because I finally accepted they had never really loved me. Maybe they loved the version of me that stayed quiet, never complained, and always stepped aside for Travis. But the version that survived without them and finally learned to say no had become a problem. And in their eyes, problems had to be removed. I immediately sent the footage to my landlord and told him I was seriously considering filing a police report. He felt sorry for me, looked genuinely shocked, but I could tell he was nervous too. He said that if I didn't feel safe anymore, maybe I should think about finding another place to live. I knew he meant well, but it still felt like I was the one paying for my father's actions all over again. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I barely slept. Every time I walked past a window, I caught myself checking for shadows outside. I stopped wearing headphones on my walk home, and I even started carrying pepper spray. I hated doing that. I hated what it meant. I wasn't afraid of strangers. I was afraid of my own family. That was what finally broke me. It wasn't the messages from relatives or Travis showing fake lease papers or even my father trying to break into my apartment. It was realizing that if I hadn't changed the lock or if I had gotten home 10 minutes earlier, nobody would have stood up for me. There would have been no justice, no support, and my own family probably would have said I was overreacting. That was the moment I hit rock bottom. I called in sick for the first time in years. I stayed inside my apartment for 3 days without going anywhere. I ignored messages, cancelled every plan I had, let the dirty dishes pile up, and turned my phone off every night just so I could remember what real silence felt like. I sat on my couch replaying the security footage over and over until the battery died. Watching my own father standing at my door with shaking hands and constantly looking over his shoulder felt like watching a complete stranger. During those days I cried only once. It wasn't loud or dramatic. I just sat on the bathroom floor holding a towel while it felt like every bit of strength I had left slowly disappeared. I wasn't furious and I wasn't sobbing. I was just exhausted, tired of fighting for a place that should have been mine from the beginning, tired of pretending everything was fine, tired of building my life over and over while nobody ever noticed what it had taken to build it in the first place. But somewhere in that silence, something changed. I don't know exactly what caused it. Maybe it was seeing how far they were willing to go, or maybe it was finally admitting how much they had hurt me. For the first time in years, I stopped reacting to them and started making a plan. The first thing I did was save every piece of security footage from the past month. I archived it, made backups, and uploaded everything to password-protected cloud storage. I documented every interaction, including Travis's voicemail, every text message, and screenshots of Facebook comments from relatives repeating the same guilt-filled story. My apartment slowly turned into a file full of evidence. Then I started protecting every other part of my life. I changed all of my passwords, enabled two-factor authentication on every account, called my credit card companies, placed fraud alerts on my credit file, and checked my credit report. Nothing looked suspicious, but I wasn't going to wait until it did. After that, I told my boss what was happening. I didn't give him every painful detail, but I explained enough. I told him I was dealing with serious family problems and that someone might try to contact me or show up at work. To my surprise, he couldn't have been more supportive. He gave me a few days off, told me to take care of myself, and even offered to send any unknown callers straight to voicemail. It was funny how complete strangers could show more kindness than my own family ever had. During those days off, I met with a lawyer. A friend recommended her. Her name was Paige, and she was quiet, calm, and serious. She listened to everything without interrupting me. I told her about being thrown out at 18, my parents suddenly coming back into my life, the manipulation, Travis trying to take over my lease, my father attempting to break into my apartment, the security footage, and every piece of evidence I had collected. When I finished, she leaned forward and calmly said, "You have enough here to seek a restraining order, and possibly more depending on what happens next." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could finally breathe again. That conversation gave me something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Control. It wasn't revenge, it was simply knowing I finally had options, and that was enough to help me start healing. Over the next several months, I focused on myself instead of them. I signed up for a certification course I had been putting off for years, one focused on cloud infrastructure and data security. Most people would probably find it boring, but to me it was another step forward. Every evening I came home, cooked dinner and studied. No drama, no distractions, just progress. I also started seeing a therapist. At first I went once a week, then twice. Her name was Brooke, and she never treated me like I was helpless. She challenged the ways I avoided things, helped me recognize my habits, and slowly made me realize I wasn't broken. I had simply spent so many years surviving that I no longer knew what feeling safe was supposed to feel like. During one session, I admitted I didn't think I would ever fully trust another person again. She smiled and said, "Maybe you don't need to trust everyone. Maybe you only need to trust yourself enough not to let the wrong people get too close." I never forgot those words. As time passed, I started making real friends, people who wanted nothing from me. I even joined a running group which anyone who knew me would have found funny. Somehow, running beside a group of strangers every week slowly made me feel like myself again. I even started going on a few casual dates. Nothing serious, but I found myself smiling more and actually laughing again. Sometimes I'd walk around my apartment and realize I was simply content. I hadn't felt that kind of peace in almost 10 years. But with that peace came something else. Clarity. Even though I was rebuilding my life one step at a time, I hadn't forgotten what they had done. They were still out there, still twisting the story, still making me the villain. I didn't want to stay trapped in the past, but I wasn't going to let them rewrite it without a fight, especially after what happened next. It didn't start with a phone call or someone knocking at my door. It started with a letter. Someone had slipped it into my mailbox. There was a handwritten return address, but no stamp. It was from my mother. I stared at the envelope for almost 10 minutes before I finally opened it. The letter was 3 pages long, written in the same neat cursive she used on birthday cards back when she still remembered to send them. At first it sounded familiar. She wrote that they missed me, that they had never meant to hurt me, and that life had been difficult back then. Then the real reason appeared. She said Travis had fallen into a deep depression but was finally trying to get his life together. According to her, they wanted to transfer the family home to him so he could have a fresh start, but there was one problem. Years ago, when my grandfather left a small inheritance to Travis and me, my name had been included as one of the heirs. She said they just needed me to sign a few papers. It was only a formality, nothing important, just paperwork. I folded the letter, laid it on the table, and sat there thinking for a long time. This wasn't about my apartment anymore. They wanted something much bigger now. It involved the family house, inheritance, property, things I didn't even realize I still had legal rights to. They knew about it the whole time. They just never mentioned it until they needed something again. Until Travis needed something. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't panic, I didn't feel broken, I felt focused. This wasn't only about surviving anymore, it was about setting the record straight legally, financially, and emotionally. For the first time in my life, I was going to write my own ending. But before I could do that, I needed to collect every piece of the puzzle they thought I had forgotten. When everything was finally in place, they would know what it felt like to be the one left outside looking in. By the time I finished reading my mother's letter for the third time, I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I was convinced they were trying to erase me, not emotionally, but legally, quietly and permanently. The letter wasn't angry or threatening, and that was what made it so disturbing. Every sentence was wrapped in fake kindness, the same tone she used years ago whenever I questioned why Travis got something I didn't. It's not about being fair. It's about what's best for everyone. Only this time, it wasn't about dessert. It was about the family home, a house I hadn't even thought about in years. Digging through the legal history of my own childhood felt strange. I emailed the letter to Paige, my lawyer, and she replied within an hour. If they're asking you to sign anything connected to your grandfather's will, don't sign a thing until we get the original documents and see exactly what they're trying to change. That was all I needed to hear. The next morning, she requested the original estate records. While we waited, I did what I always did best. I documented everything. I created a digital folder called Operation Cleanup, mostly because giving it a name helped keep my anger under control. I organized every text, voicemail, letter, and message into a timeline. I also started writing everything I remembered just to clear my head. It turned out to be more helpful than I expected. The more I wrote, the more patterns I noticed. Every time my family had reached out, they wanted something. It was never about reconnecting. It was always about taking. I remembered being 14 when Dad forgot his wallet at the grocery store. I paid for everything, and by dinner, they had turned it into a speech about how I owed them for raising me. I remembered giving Travis my laptop after his broke in high school. He told everyone I was generous while my parents acted like they were the ones who had given it to him. Even after 10 years of silence, they hadn't come back because they regretted what they had done. They came back because they had another plan. This time, so did I. 2 days later, Paige called me. "I found something," she said. "Your grandfather's trust was split evenly between you and Travis." I felt my heart start pounding. Then she continued. "The house your parents are living in was never actually theirs. It was purchased through the trust, and your grandfather left very clear instructions." "What instructions?" I asked. "If the house is ever sold, the money has to be divided equally between both heirs. And if anyone wants to transfer ownership, both heirs have to agree and sign off on it." "They can't transfer the house to Travis without your approval," Paige said. I just sat there in silence. My parents had been living in that house for more than 10 years. They had to know, or at least suspect, what the trust actually said. That meant they were counting on me either never finding out or blindly signing everything without asking questions. Paige kept talking. "If you want, we can file paperwork to block any attempt to transfer ownership. Just keep in mind it'll let them know you've figured it out." I thought about it for a moment before answering. "No, let them believe I'm still thinking about it. I want them to get comfortable." She was quiet for a second before asking, "Mason, are you planning something?" I looked at her and said, "I'm planning to make sure they never get the chance to do this again." Getting everything ready took several weeks. The first step was gathering information. I requested property tax records, deed history, and every document connected to the trust. Paige handled the legal side, but I wanted to read everything myself. The more I learned, the angrier I became. They had worked around loopholes, ignored the co-ownership rules, and spent years treating my inheritance like it belonged to them. Even the renovation permits listed Travis as the future owner. The second step was staying silent. Step was staying. I never answered my mother's letter. I didn't call and I didn't argue. That silence clearly bothered them. About a week later, another letter arrived. It was shorter, more emotional, and filled with underlined words like family, unity, and legacy. One sentence actually made me laugh. "We hope you're not letting old wounds cloud your judgment." Old wounds? They threw me out on my 18th birthday and expected me to forget it. I said nothing. I let them think I was still the quiet, uncertain kid they had kicked out all those years ago. While they believed that, I was already working on the third step, finding allies. The first person I called was my cousin Chloe. We had never been especially close because she lived across the state, but we always got along. She had messaged me during the family's guilt campaign months earlier, but unlike everyone else, she hadn't attacked me. She just seemed confused. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mason." "Hey, Rach, got a minute?" "Hey, Rach." That one phone call changed everything. It turned out Chloe had her own problems with my parents, especially Travis. A few years earlier, at a family reunion, he had cornered her husband and tried convincing him to invest in some questionable cryptocurrency scheme. She never trusted him after that. When I explained the truth about the trust, the property, and everything my parents were trying to do, she got furious. "I knew something wasn't right," she said. "Aunt Linda always acted like that house belonged to them. Grandpa always said it was for both boys, not just Travis." We talked for almost an hour. Before we hung up, she told me, "Whatever you're planning, I'm with you." After that, I contacted 3 more cousins. 2 of them had been pushed out of the family themselves for ridiculous reasons, like dating someone my parents didn't approve of or moving out of state. Their stories were different, but the pattern was exactly the same. Within a week, I had a small group of family outsiders willing to support me if things got ugly. Some of them even had old letters, photos, and voicemails suggesting my parents had known the trust rules all along and ignored them anyway. The last piece fell into place when Travis called. I let it go to voicemail. This time he didn't sound desperate. He sounded confident, almost cocky. "Hey Mason, I know you're taking your time with the paperwork, but just so you know, Mom and Dad are finishing everything with the lawyer. We're hoping to wrap it up this month. It'd be easier if you just signed the papers, but I get it. Sometimes people need to feel like they're in control. Just don't wait too long. The whole family is watching." That voicemail gave me exactly what I needed. They were moving ahead with something they had no legal right to do, and now I had proof they intended to. The next morning, I met Paige at her office and told her my plan. We prepared a cease and desist letter for their lawyer, quoting the exact trust clauses they were violating. But we didn't send it right away. I wanted the timing to be perfect. Travis's birthday was coming up, and my parents always made a huge event out of it with family dinner, presents, and speeches about his bright future. If they planned to announce that the house was his, that would be the night. Paige agreed to have the letter and the injunction paperwork ready to go. But I still had one more move to make. About a week before Travis's birthday, I quietly contacted a local investigative reporter who had covered questionable real estate cases before. I sent copies of the public trust records, my mother's letter, and a redacted version of Travis's voicemail. Just enough to get their attention. It worked. Inheritance fraud involving family estates was exactly the kind of story they were interested in, especially one involving a brother who had been thrown out at 18 while the other was trying to take his share years later. I didn't tell the reporter everything. Not yet. My plan wasn't finished, but the trap was already set, and I was done pretending to be nice. The night of Travis's birthday dinner, I barely slept. It wasn't fear or nerves keeping me awake. It was focus. Everything was ready. The documents had been reviewed, the legal response was prepared, and my phone was fully charged. I even set a reminder for 7:30 in the evening called Drop the Hammer, timed for the speech I knew my father would give. Paige was waiting with the injunction paperwork, and the journalist had already emailed twice, asking if I wanted to add a final statement before the article went live that weekend. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. Anger would have been easy. This came from surviving 10 years of silence and being treated like I didn't exist. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was making sure they would never erase me again. I put on a plain black button-up shirt, not because I planned to go to the dinner, but because I wanted to look composed when I spoke to Chloe on FaceTime. She was already there, sitting at the far end of the table like she didn't really belong. She had agreed to attend only if she could record everything. At 7:24, she texted, "He's starting." At 7:28, another message came in. "They're bringing out a huge cake. Dad just stood up with a glass." I opened the shared drive folder labeled Inheritance Audit and checked that every file was visible and time-stamped: emails, texts, voicemails, the trust documents, my mother's letter, Travis's smug voicemail, all of it. Then I waited. Chloe called at 7:33 and I answered immediately. She held the phone low beneath the table, but I could still see the backyard lit with string lights. Travis sat at the head of a long outdoor table wearing a polo shirt and that practiced smile of his. My parents stood beside him, looking proud enough for a campaign photo. My father raised his glass. "To Travis," he said loudly enough for the recording to catch every word, "the rock of this family and the man who's finally ready to become the homeowner of the family house." People clapped politely. My mother dabbed at her eyes. Chloe tilted the camera slightly higher. Travis lifted his own glass and smiled. "I'm honored," he said. "It's been a long road, and I'm grateful Mom and Dad trust me with this legacy. We've already started the paperwork, so it's official." I looked at the screen and smiled. It was time. I sent Paige a single word. Now. Less than 30 seconds later, the cease and desist letter landed in their lawyer's inbox marked high importance. Copies went to my parents' shared email account and to the county recorder's office, requesting an immediate freeze on any title transfer connected to the trust. Then I opened the article draft one last time. The headline read, "The Invisible Heir, Family Trust Dispute Reveals Alleged Deception and Legal Manipulation." I added my final statement and hit send. They erased me the day I turned 18. They won't forget me now. The article went live 5 minutes later. I knew they had seen it within the hour because by 8:45, my phone started exploding. Chloe texted first, "Your mum just screamed. Your dad is on the phone yelling at someone. Travis looks like he saw a ghost." A minute later, Paige emailed, "County confirmed. Title transfer frozen pending review. You're protected." After that came 2 full days of silence. No calls, no visits, no emotional letters. Just silence. Then the fallout started. Monday morning, Paige called. "They're fighting it," she said. "They're fighting it." Travis's lawyer responded, "But it's weak. They're arguing implied transfer rights, and the trust doesn't allow that. Exactly what we expected." I asked what happened next. "We answer with evidence," she said. "The eviction when you were 18, the inheritance clause, the pressure campaign, the misrepresentations. This is moving beyond a civil dispute. We may be looking at fraud." Hearing that word felt different. It felt like someone had finally named what they had been doing all along. They hadn't simply tried to take the house. They had carefully planned to take it, while assuming I was still weak enough not to fight back. They never stopped to ask who I had become. During the next 2 weeks, the article spread through our small town. It never went viral, but enough people read it that questions started circulating. A few neighbors reached out to ask if I was all right. One of them told me, "Your dad always talked about how proud he was of his 2 sons. Guess he only meant one." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The truth was speaking for itself. Legally, the house was frozen. No sale, no transfer, no change in ownership could happen without my signature. Their lawyer started retreating quickly after Paige filed a formal complaint with the state bar, accusing him of ethical violations for attempting a deed transfer without full heir consent. That got his attention fast, but the biggest damage didn't happen in court. It happened inside the family. Word spread faster than I expected. Chloe told me Aunt June confronted my parents after church and asked if the article was true. She admitted she had always wondered why I never came around anymore and said maybe they owed me more than a simple phone call. Not long after that, my cousin Derek shared the article on Facebook with the caption, "Funny how people forget who poured the foundation once they're busy decorating the house." Little by little, the cracks started to show. My parents immediately went into damage control mode. My mum sent out a long email with the subject "Our Side of the Story," claiming I had twisted the facts and insisting they were only trying to do what was best for both of their sons. The whole message was packed with fake apologies and passive-aggressive comments like, "We're sorry you feel hurt," and "You've always been too sensitive." I forwarded the email to Paige. She read it, laughed, and said, "Keep every single message. This is excellent evidence." Then Travis finally called me. I looked at my phone for a few seconds before answering. He didn't even bother saying hello. The first thing out of his mouth was, "Why are you doing this?" I leaned back in my chair and answered, "You mean protecting what's legally mine?" He fired back, "You're destroying this family." I shook my head. "No, I'm refusing to let you take what's mine." "We weren't trying to steal anything," he said. "Really?" I replied. "You lied to my landlord. You tried to take over my lease. You forged paperwork. Then you went behind my back to take the trust. What would you call that?" He stayed quiet, so I kept talking. "When I was 18, you stood there while they threw me out. You watched me disappear, and you never once asked if I was okay. Now you expect me to believe this was all some misunderstanding?" His voice got louder. "I was just a kid." "So was I answered. "The difference is, nobody was fighting for me." There was a long silence. Finally, he quietly said, "They're going to lose the house." I didn't answer. After another pause, he asked, "Do you even care?" I thought about all those nights I spent wondering why I was never enough. I remembered the birthdays nobody celebrated, the holidays I spent alone, and the years I lived without hearing from any of them. Then I finally answered. No, I just care that they understand why. A month later, the case was finally over. The court ruled that the house had to be sold. Under the terms of the trust, I received half of the proceeds, a little over $180,000. My parents were ordered to move out within 90 days. Paige handled everything, and I never had to see any of them in court. The only thing I received was one final envelope with no return address. Inside was a picture of the house showing the backyard and the same table where Travis had proudly announced that the home was his. Across the top of the photo, someone had written in black ink, "Hope you're happy." I pinned that picture to my refrigerator, not because it was a trophy, but because it reminded me that staying silent doesn't make you weak, that walking away doesn't mean you lost, and that sometimes the strongest ending is building a life where the people who hurt you no longer get to decide how your story ends.